Imagine lying down after a long sun-drenched day along the Nile. The air is still. The mud brick walls hold the fading heat. You stretch out on a woven reed mat and place your head not on a pillow but on a carved block of stone. To us, it might seem uncomfortable, but to the ancient Egyptians, it was sacred, a place where the soul could dream safely under the protection of the gods. Tonight, we'll travel back to a time when even sleep was part of a grand cosmic order. You'll hear about the curious objects placed under the heads of farmers and pharaohs alike, how dreams were interpreted like messages, and why the way one slept could shape not just a night's rest, but an entire afterlife. Settle in. The Nile is quiet. The stone headrest is waiting. Chapter 1. Cradled by Stone. It's hard to imagine falling asleep with your head resting on a block of carved limestone, polished but unyielding. Yet for centuries, that is exactly how many people in ancient Egypt found their rest. The Egyptian pillow, if one can even call it that, was a headrest, typically a curved platform supported by a central column, designed to cradle the neck rather than cushion the head. To modern ears, it sounds uncomfortable, almost like a punishment. But to the ancient Egyptians, these headrests were both practical and symbolic. Their use wasn't restricted to daily lifestone, and wooden headrests were found in burial tombs, included alongside other grave goods deemed necessary for the afterlife. In the flickering firelight of reed oil lamps, in rooms of mud brick houses with linen curtains billowing gently in the desert breeze, ancient Egyptians lay down with their heads held aloft, believing that rest was a sacred passage. To the world beyond, the Nile Valley was a place of precision, ritual, and order. Every facet of life, from how one farmed to how one slept, reflected a deeper harmony with the world. The shape of the headrest, curved to match the nape of the neck, held not just the body, but the Ka, the spiritual double believed to live within. Each person, elevating the head during sleep, was thought to protect the Ka from demons, dreams, and diseases that hovered close to the earth. Of course, not everyone had the same quality of sleep or headrests. Inscriptions from Theban tombs and fragments of household inventories show us that higher classes enjoyed ornate headrests made of alabaster, ivory, or rare woods, intricately carved with protective symbols, hawks for Horus, ankhs for life. For the poor, simple wooden or ceramic version sufficed. Even among death's furnishings, social hierarchy loomed. Pharaohs slept with gods etched beneath their skulls. Farmers, if lucky, got smooth acacia or palm wood. One particularly fascinating artifact, now housed in the British Museum, belonged to a priest named Ipu, who lived during the reign of Amenhotep III, around 1390 BC. His headrest, found in his tomb in Thebes, was delicately shaped from sycamore wood and bore the inscription, "May your dreams be guarded by the Eye of Horus." The symbolism here is layered. The Eye of Horus was both a protector and a cosmic surveillance system of sorts, ensuring order was maintained in both waking and dreaming worlds. But what did Egyptians dream about? And how did they understand what dreams meant? The Egyptian fascination with dreams was immense. They believed that during sleep, the soul left the body, wandering across unseen realms. Entire papyri are dedicated to dream interpretation. One such example is the Chester Beatty Papyrus, a dream manual from the 13th century BCE. This papyrus listed dozens of dream scenarios, each followed by a prognostication, some good, some ominous. For example, dreaming that one sees oneself eating crocodile meat, that was considered auspicious. Seeing oneself dead, strangely enough, that often meant longevity and peace in many homes, especially those of literate priests and scribes. Dream books were kept near the sleeping area, like bedtime companions. Dreams weren't idle mental activity, they were communications from the gods. And in a world where life was filled with uncertainty, floods of the Nile, plagues, and fickle royal favor, every divine message counted. Of course, sleeping arrangements varied dramatically depending on status. while the majority of Egyptians likely slept on mats laid across earthen floors or reed-woven pallets. Wealthier individuals had actual beds-raised platforms of wood, often slanted downward from head to foot to aid air circulation. These beds were often strung with leather or woven cords to support the body, and a light linen sheet served more for pest deterrence than warmth. Mosquitoes and sand fleas were constant companions. Heat management, after all, was essential. Egyptian nights in the dry season could be stifling even without fire or insulation. Open-air sleeping on flat rooftops was common. Families would ascend ladders to their homes' flat tops, spreading mats and waiting for the cooling winds to sweep down from the desert. There, under the stars and beside clay jars of water left out to cool, children fell asleep to the distant hum of frogs in irrigation canals and the soft rustle of palm leaves. And yet, sleep was not always safe. Snakes, scorpions, and even roaming hyenas posed threats. So did human thieves. It was not uncommon for families to sleep lightly or in shifts, especially in urban centers. Doors were bolted from the inside with heavy wooden beams, and in more affluent homes, guards might be stationed near entrances. Sleep, for all its sacredness, was also a time of vulnerability. But no moment of vulnerability rivaled the sleep of death. In Tomb art, we often see images of the deceased lying on beds surprisingly similar to their real life counterparts, surrounded by offerings and protective deities. The connection between nightly sleep and eternal sleep was more than metaphorical. The journey of the sun god Ra, who was said to sail through the underworld every night only to be reborn at dawn, mirrored the journey each soul hoped to make. To die was to sleep in sacred stillness, and hopefully to awaken, if not in the physical world, then in the blessed fields of Ayaru, the Egyptian paradise. One might wonder, how did these simple, even austere sleeping tools become imbued with such profound meaning? How did a hard slab of wood under the neck represent both divine connection and physical rest? Perhaps it is because the Egyptians did not see sleep as escape or laziness, but rather as a necessary and sacred function, an act requiring as much intention as any ritual. In a land of fierce sun and hard labor, even rest had purpose, but how? Did these beliefs about sleep and dreams evolve across the millennia of Egyptian civilization? As the country transitioned through dynasties and foreign rule, from Nubians to Greeks to Romans, did the headrest survive? Did their dreams change with the world? Chapter 2. When the Nile dreamed differently. The Nile was not always still. Over the course of more than 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian civilization, the rhythm of sleep and the beliefs surrounding it changed with the shifting tides of politics, religion, and foreign influence. Yet the hard curve of the headrest remained, a small but stubborn symbol of continuity. When we left off, we were in the heart of the New Kingdom around 3090 BC, when Egypt was at its zenith. Temples swelled with gold offerings, tombs were adorned with detailed hieroglyphs, and the night, though still dangerous, was mapped with meaning. But what happens to sleep when the empire begins to crack? As the 20th dynasty gave way to the 3rd intermediate period, around 1070 BCE, the central government began to weaken. Power fractured among competing priesthoods, local warlords, and distant vassals. The security once offered by state-sponsored tomb building and the might of Thebes began to vanish. Sleep, for many, likely became more fractured as well. Archaeological evidence from residential sites in places like Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans who built the royal tombs, shows subtle shifts in architecture and daily routine. Rooms became more multifunctional. Sleeping quarters, once private and tucked deep into the house, began to merge with communal areas. Headrests continued to appear in graves, but with fewer inscriptions. The personalization waned. Perhaps sleep, once so ceremoniously guarded, became more utilitarian, more vulnerable to the instability beyond the walls. Foreign powers made their mark too. Libyans settled in the Delta. Nubian rulers from the south eventually established the 25th dynasty. Despite these changes, the core of Egyptian daily life remained surprisingly stable. The peasants still rose with the sun, still fell asleep after tending fields or grinding grain under the same sky. The stone headrest endured, but one foreign influence changed not just politics, but sleep itself. When Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BCE, Egypt became a Hellenistic kingdom under the Ptolemies. With them came Greek customs, new foods, new fashions, and crucially, new ideas about the body and rest. In Greek philosophy, sleep was still mystical, but less divine. Aristotle saw it as a necessary biological function, the body's way of cooling the inner heat of digestion. Dreams, he suggested, could arise from physical imbalances or impressions, not necessarily divine messages. This idea began to erode the Egyptian concept of dreams as sacred dialogues. In elite circles, dreams became curiosities to be interpreted by philosophers or physicians, not omens from the gods. Greek-style beds, softer, lower, more reclined, became common among the urban elite. They were often outfitted with cushions, sometimes even wool-filled bolsters. A stone headrest would have seemed absurd in a fashionable Alexandrian villa. Still, in the countryside, among farmers and older temples clinging to tradition, the old customs endured. Tombs in southern Egypt still contained wooden headrests as late as the Roman period. This coexistence of old and new is one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian history. In the great multicultural swirl of Greco-Roman Egypt, you might have found an elderly priest in Karnak still using a sycamore wood headrest inscribed with a prayer to Horus, while his grandson in Alexandria slept on a linen-draped couch beside a Greek lamp shaped like a wine vessel. And then came Rome. By the time Egypt became a Roman province in 30 BCE, after the death of Cleopatra VII, the sleep culture had changed further. Roman influence emphasized practicality. Roman homes in Egypt had courtyards and sometimes sleeping alcoves, but increasingly, portable furniture and sleeping couches lecti were the norm. Soft mattresses, pillows stuffed with straw or feathers, and woolen blankets became more accessible. Urban homes had bedchambers with lockable doors and small oil lamps that could be trimmed low for sleeping. The practice of sleeping elevated on rooftops or mats in courtyards didn't vanish, though. The Egyptian climate still dictated reality. Summer nights remained hot, and even Romans adapted by installing shaded outdoor sleeping platforms. Sleep was never entirely cultural. It was always environmental too, interestingly. It was during this Roman period that sleep and dreams became bureaucratized. The Romans brought with them a taste for dream manuals and oracles, especially the cult of Serapis, a Greco-Egyptian fusion deity. Serapis temples included incubatory chambers, special sleeping areas where supplicants would lie down hoping for divine dreams. The practice was ancient in Egypt, but the Greeks and Romans formalized it. Temple staff interpreted dreams for a fee. Pilgrims came seeking answers for everything from disease to infertility to lost property. In this sense, dreams became almost transactional. One dream interpreter in Memphis, a man named Ptolemaeus, whose name appears in a fragmentary papyrus, recorded dozens of dreams from clients along with his interpretations and suggested offerings. A man dreams he is swallowed by a crocodile. He must make an offering of barley to Sobek for protection in trade. One entry reads so. Sleep persisted, but it changed. The humble stone headrest had become rare by the 1st century CE tombs. Now contained pillows of linen or even leather. Yet, old habits are hard to break. In some isolated oases, archaeologists have uncovered Roman-era burials with wooden headrests alongside coin offerings, suggesting a hybridization of beliefs. Dreams were still gates, but now opened by multiple keys. And what about ordinary people? Well, for the vast majority of Egypt's population, those who did not live in temples or villas, The experience of sleep likely remained relatively unchanged. They still slept on floor mats or low pallets. They still used folded cloaks for warmth, drank water cooled in clay pots before bed, and lived in mud brick homes that cooled down only slightly after dusk. In these homes, perhaps the dreams still came, unbidden and unrecorded. They did not write papyri. Their headrests, if any, have long decayed. But they slept through empires, through floods and grain taxes, through occupations and revolts. And in their dreams, whether sacred, mundane, or forgotten, they carried the unseen burdens of a world always in transition. One cannot help but wonder, how many dreams have we lost? How many fragments of sleep, of midnight fears and morning insights, have vanished simply because they belong to the voiceless? A farmhand who slept beside a donkey in a crumbling shed may have dreamed of walking the stars or of speaking with the gods, but we will never know, and yet his sleep mattered. It kept him alive, let him work another day, kept the grain moving to the cities, the temples fed, the empire functioning. Was the act of sleep, then, the most democratic ritual of all? Whether on alabaster beds or on straw mats beside a cooking fire, they all closed their eyes. They all dreamed, in some way. And as they did, the Nile kept flowing. But in the twilight of empire, as temples were shuttered and headrests disappeared, did Egypt's ancient belief in sacred sleep finally die, or did it simply change its form? Chapter 3. Sleep Eternal, From Sacred Headrests to Forgotten Graves. The final centuries of ancient Egypt's independent identity faded not with sudden collapse, but with a long exhalation, a sigh across centuries, from the Roman conquest through the rise of Christianity and the eventual spread of Islam. And in this gentle, if relentless, erosion of dynasties, the concept of sleep transformed once more. The stone headrest, once cradling the necks of viziers and priests, began its slow disappearance. By the 4th century CE, when Egypt had become a center of early Christianity, its symbolic meanings had all but vanished from everyday use. Christian burial practices shifted away from including personal objects in tombs. The ancient rituals of sleeping for eternity beneath carved wooden pillows gave way to simpler burials, marked only by crosses and prayers, and yet sleep remained. Monastic life in the Egyptian desert, the beginnings of Christian monasticism, introduced new ideas about rest and asceticism. The Desert Fathers, men like Anthony of Egypt and Pacomus, withdrew from worldly life and lived in sparse stone cells. Their nights were not for dreaming, but for vigilance. Sleep was no longer a sacred passage, but a temptation to be mastered. Many of them, according to accounts, slept sitting upright or on the bare ground, avoiding comfort as a form of spiritual discipline. One early monk, known only through hagiographic writings as Macarius of Alexandria, was said to have slept only 2 hours a night, leaning against a wall with no support. To sleep too long, he believed, was to court the demons of sloth. In his view, the path to enlightenment lay not in dreams, but in waking struggle. In these desert communities, we find the earliest documented sleep schedules rigidly timed by bells or communal discipline. Monks would rise before dawn to chant, sleep in intervals between prayers, and often fast through the night. If the Egyptian headrest was once a tool of spiritual connection, now sleep itself had become an offering to God, reduced, rationed, and repurposed. Outside the monasteries, in villages and farms still hugging the Nile, a quieter revolution unfolded. Islam arrived in Egypt in the 7th century CE, bringing with it new customs and rhythms, 5 daily prayers, including one before sunrise and another after nightfall. These prayer cycles subtly shaped how people structured their rest. Nighttime became divided, interrupted gently by ritual. The concept of the Kailula, a midday nap, also took root. This tradition, based on hadiths attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, recommended a short rest in the heat of day, reinforcing patterns of segmented sleep already familiar to Egyptians. And once more, sleep was both sacred and practical. Though the headrest was long gone from Egyptian bedrooms, the attitude that sleep had meaning persisted. Dream interpretation remained part of cultural life, adapted through Islamic lenses. In medieval Cairo, scholars and mystics wrote about dreams in religious texts and medical treatises. Ibn Sirin, a famous interpreter of dreams from the 8th century, became well known in Egyptian households. His dream manual was copied, studied, and quoted across the Islamic world. Dreams were still signs, but now they were filtered through a new framework. Where once one dreamt of crocodiles and the Eye of Horus, now dreamers might see white garments or flowing rivers and turn to a sheikh for interpretation. The language changed, but the longing for meaning did not. And what of the physical space? Of sleep? By the medieval period, Egyptian homes featured more dedicated sleeping quarters. Cushions, rugs, and wooden bedsteads returned more comfortable, more human in our modern sense. Linen sheets, cotton-stuffed mattresses, and mosquito nets became more common, especially among the middle and upper classes. The ancient stone headrest had vanished, its absence marked not by memorials, but by silence, yet in tombs, unfaded. Murals, and in museum cases, it endures. To hold a headrest today, to see its smooth curve and delicate base, is to touch something unexpectedly intimate. These were not symbols to be admired from afar. They touched skin. They bore the weight of dreams. They carried the vulnerability of a sleeping neck, the heat of an exhausted body lying down after plowing a field or inscribing sacred texts by lamplight. In that way, the ancient Egyptian headrest is less about its shape and more about what it held, a belief that sleep mattered, that what happened when your eyes closed was part of the larger cosmic order. Modern science has since given us new tools, REM cycles, melatonin levels, brainwave scans, but the same question lingers. What happens when we sleep? Do we simply shut down, or do we enter another place? A continuation of thought, a portal to something unseen? For all our knowledge, sleep remains a mystery, and perhaps that is why the ancient Egyptians gave it such reverence. They did not pretend to know. Instead, they built small, carved tools of wood and alabaster, and placed them under the heads of their dead, just in case the journey continued. In the grand temples of Karnak and Luxor, in dusty storehouses behind museums, and in the buried remnants of homes along the Nile, sleep still leaves traces. Not in feathers or silk, but in stone and silence. These are not the artifacts of emperors or conquerors. They are the tools of rest, used by people whose names we'll never know, whose dreams we'll never read, but who slept all the same. And when you rest tonight, consider, what will remain of your sleep? What quiet object might someone find 1,000 years from now, wondering how you dreamed, and what you feared, and what you hoped? What will your pillow say about you? And so, beneath stars that once shone over Thebes and Memphis, another night in ancient Egypt comes to a close. A stone headrest cradles the head, the body rests, and the soul drifts into dreams. Thank you for spending this quiet journey with me, exploring the gentle rituals of rest from thousands of years ago. If this story helped you feel just a little more at ease, or maybe even guided you towards sleep, I invite you to gently tap the like button. And if you'd like more slow, steady journeys through forgotten corners of history, consider subscribing to this channel. Quite boring sleep. Here, the past doesn't rush, and neither do we. Until next time, sleep well. Good night.